I am so ready. Countdown, 3.
I don't know how those companies effectively stay in business in the future.
What you two are doing is a boundless mindset.
Thinking that you weren't going to have to learn a lot. Well, you made a huge mistake.
There's one place I feel safe geeking out is
It's
here.
here.
There's a reason why we chose technology and not marketing.
2, 1, and welcome to the first inaugural run of the CIO Project. I am sitting here with my co-host and longtime friend and colleague, Brian Shield. Brian's currently the CIO, CTO, and senior, I got to get these out of my mouth, senior vice president of the famed Boston Red Sox and the national chair of Inspire CIO, which is the fastest growing and most influential CIO association in the country, with 40 markets and over 1,700 members.
Wow. Thanks,
Send it over to you, Brian.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Very thoughtful intro. My co-host, Howie is a longtime colleague and friend, and someone whose business judgment and guidance and leadership has been really kind of instrumental in my career, and really had a profound impact on the way I think about problem solving, and just to sort of throw a big compliment Howie's way, off script here, when you think about changing and you think about sort of adjusting to the times and things, Howie is, in my opinion, one of the utmost professionals in terms of continuing to kind of remake himself and learning new skills and adapting to change. And so something that we really want to talk a lot about with all of you. So I'm excited to be with you here, Howie, and on our inaugural podcast. So look forward to get it rolling.
That's wonderful. And I'm humbled by those words. It's beautiful words. I really appreciate it and receive that. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do in this show, right? So we're looking forward to a lot of exciting things to come. And we're going to have some guests, and we'll talk about those here in a minute. I think you and I really wanted to just kind of riff a little bit today about the show and kind of run through the format with everybody. And as this is our first show, Brian, can you talk a little bit about what we're trying to achieve here, kind of like our intent and purpose, so to speak?
Sure.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about, there's a million podcasts out there, obviously, and
right.
You think about, how we might differentiate ourselves from others, and, when you think about our respective experience, I think it's all about, humanizing sort of technology leadership through honest conversations about successes, failures, lessons learned, and how, we can basically adapt and evolve and learn about others' stories of everything from perseverance to how they sort of overcame adversity to really become the leaders that they are today. And so we're really going to try to make this a very personal journey. And we will have guests that'll be more technical than others, but I think, how as you and I both know, one of the most important things to the success of CIOs and aspiring technology leaders and even business people is our ability to speak, truthfully, humbly, and kind of learn from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, I think one of the things that we're going to look to make a staple is our tagline is real talk, real tech, and confessions, right? And so we're definitely going to be some real tech on here. Like you said, they're going to be some of the guests that we bring on here are going to be heavier on the tech side, and some of the guests are going to be heavier on the executive side, right? The executive management side. And so we're going to cover the breadth of things. But I think what we're really going to get into, and we're going to start with you today, is confessions, right? Because I believe that we learn more from our failures in life than we do our successes, and we've all had them. And if you don't raise your hand when someone says, "Have you ever failed in life?" then you must lie about other things too, right? So we're gonna get a little deep into that today. I think just talking a little bit about our format. I think this will be a general podcast model, right? We're gonna have cool and interesting guests, and we're gonna cover the things that we just talked about, and we're gonna do our confessions, and it's gonna be super, super cool. Speaking of guests, Brian, what are your thoughts about the guests we'll be having on the show? Kind of, how we pick them, how they'll fit in, who you might be thinking about, if we can even lay a hint to that. What do you?
Yeah,
what say you?
absolutely. Yeah, so when we thought about this, I've been blessed with having broad exposure to a lot of CIOs, industry leaders, emerging technology companies, VCs and other sort of startups, authors and things. And so we're going to cherry pick many of those and really kind of use this as an opportunity to, with the emphasis being on learning and on, personal and professional development, and how do we effectively kind of grow, if you will. I mean, there is no cheat sheet. There's no breadcrumbs for being a CIO. You can't just kind of read a book about it. and
Right, right.
you and I, either I've been a CIO CTO for some 30 years now, and as you've worked with, dozens and dozens in your career,
Dozens of
Howie.
you guys, yeah, yeah.
And everyone's different, and we all have different skills. And you think of the old days here a bit when they first came out, and CO kind of meant like career is over, because and by the way, super funny. I was thinking about that the other day.
I get to interject something there.
Yeah, yeah.
How many people on this audience that are listening right now? Because that's another thing too, right? Like I think audience-wise, we're going to go. We really feel like we're going to run the gamut from other IT executives and professionals in management to aspiring professionals, aspiring technology. People that want to get into maybe leadership roles and that kind of a thing. But I also think that people who aren't necessarily in management might get a lot out of this as well, because it is going to be talk about what is happening in IT in the technology world across the board, right? So there might be some young. What I'm getting at is there might be some younger crowd on here, right? How many
I
people
hope so.
Do you think? Yeah. How many people do you think actually were around during career is over?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my kids weren't. And when I think back in those days, I laugh because I was reading something the other day and I saw CISO, career is seriously over. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, it never ends. By the way, that is completely not true. I can't almost think of a category, perhaps other than AI these days, that is further from career being over. But I do think, the reason why though, and I've thought a lot about this, and I've had many friends, including myself, that have been impacted at different times of our career. And the reason why in the whole C-suite, the CIO role, sometimes CTO roles, are so both important and impacted oftentimes is because of the nature of change. If you think about the role oftentimes of CFOs, maybe CMOs, and perhaps a little bit less so, they're not fundamentally changing at such a rapid pace.
Right.
For our world, this is like hockey stick growth, and the CIO who kind of got you here may not be the CIO who's going to get you in the future. And I think that's a challenge. When you and I started out, every good CIO was a good operations person, right? I mean, they all kind of, if you couldn't keep the technology, the fragile technology up and running, then you weren't worth your weight, And as that kind of changed, as the internet became pervasive, as websites got out there, as tools stabilized, these things become, as we would call it, table stakes, right? So operational things oftentimes became table stakes. And so once you get that all functioning, your board of directors and executive teams are like, we need a guy who can, drive revenue, who can reduce expenses, who can help sort of, take us to the next level in our organization, bring competitive advantage, et cetera. And oftentimes those are kind of like right side, left side of the brain things. People who are good at one are not always good at the other. And and it's also a little bit of how I think the dichotomy sometimes between the CIO and the CTO has evolved, where one person's not anticipated or expected to be kind of such a broad leader across the board. Also using the CISO as a good example too. Right. There was a time when none of those other roles existed.
And that's actually one of my questions to you is like, how do you define the difference and how have these kind of evolved? Because I don't remember CISO 10 years ago, and the last 10 years has gone by super fast. Right, like where do these things show up? Why did they show up, and how have they kind of like commingled together here in these organizations?
Well, when I think of CISOs, in my mind, they've been around for 20 years. Now, it's not that we didn't have somebody, responsible for security before. It's just that your digital footprint was so much smaller. And even in like companies like, that I worked in, you worked with, at the Weather Channel companies, and we had one of the largest websites in the world, especially during times of hurricanes and things. There weren't...
and that technology stack was really complex.
Yeah, very complex, especially when they scaled it on a global level, and you added mobility and data sources and everything else. It was,
and broadcast and the whole bit,
the funniest thing I think of when I think of those things too, just quick tangent for folks, is I remember back in the early 2000s when we we had weather.com up and running, and for those that aren't familiar with the Weather Channel, one of the things that was always unique on the television component of it was that it was a national network that serviced over 100 million viewers and things. But it was predicated on a local model. So we had servers scattered around in 15 or plus thousand locations at cable head ends around the country that would basically intercept that national feed and overlay and replace national content with local content. And so, anyways, I digress slightly, but my point in there is that whether you think about, I remember back in the early 2000s, I'm looking at weather.com from my office in Marietta, and I'm looking at the television network, and I'm on weather.com, and the forecasts are all different. And I thought, man, I'm going to get fired. And it was, and people just don't realize it's hard enough to keep the technology up and running. It's even more complicated to keep it synchronized. And, and technology has obviously come a long ways to kind of make that much, much more feasible. But going back to your original question about CISOs, I think of CISOs as kind of maybe a 20-year sort of thing. But when I think back to the level of complexity 20 years ago, even a major company with a massive digital footprint, it paled into comparison today. The whole threat factors are exponentially more complex, and the downsides are so much more significant. So that
the
every company
stack is so much more significant today.
Absolutely. So any company nowadays, you could never expect in any kind of medium, large size company for your CIO to really be sort of a forward-leaning, expert in all things cybersecurity. That's just almost unrealistic. And then even if you're also a company that's really driving emerging technologies, whether it's nowadays AI or other types of capabilities, to kind of expect that same person to be good at all three of those buckets, and also maybe being sort of and understanding operational side of the business is really where all these things start to fall apart, right? And that's, in my mind, that's kind of how I sort of tend to think of like this bifurcation occurred. Is as we all get more sophisticated, we all realize that no one human could, have the capacity to be highly proficient across the board.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then the definition between CIO and CTO, as far as you're concerned, looks like what?
Yeah, that's a great area. It really kind of depends on the size of your business. I know a lot of CTOs who work in, Fortune 1000 companies that are in any other company, they might call them a CIO. So I think it really depends. I think generally people tend to think the CTO, is kind of more, technically capable, probably maybe something that comes from more of an app dev and software engineering kind of background,
app dev
architecture
background.
issues and other sort of things. The CIO tends to be the one, although this is changing too, that interoperates with senior leadership, the board of directors, helping set strategy, budget, goals, people issues, which we're going to be, by the way, we didn't say this, but we're going to talk a lot about people issues. Howie and I are huge believers that, if there's no other takeaway from, these podcasts that we really want you to learn is really the importance of attracting, developing, and retaining talent. Your future starting ends right there. And all these other things that we learn are really things that sort of, help drive your business and kind of make you better and things. But at the end of the day, that's job one, and really should be the job one for any really effective and senior level technology leader.
Yeah, 100%. Your people make you and break you in any business and in any organization. And I think that a lot of times what I've seen in technology is, in technology and IT, we love technology. Right. And so, every new shiny object that comes along, right? Oh, this is going to be a game changer, and this is going to solve all of these things. And a lot of times they do. But I've been a long time disciple now for coming close to 40 years. I've been a long time disciple of the trilogy, right? People, process, technology. And it doesn't matter how much technology we bring in, it doesn't matter how complicated and how sophisticated the technology stack gets, it continues to drive more discipline in how we process things and the people behind the process that are actually, driving the process, utilizing the process and benefiting from the process. So it is a huge issue that just doesn't go away, even with all of this AI and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, those are the three big key elements, the pillars that effectively kind of hold up any successful business.
Yeah.
And you mentioned process, and I think, I'm sure many leaders out there listening to this and aspiring technology folks, one of the things you need to quickly realize too is that the Peter principle is so easy to go, amok, if you will, in technology organizations, right? You've got a super sharp engineer, and so naturally, let's make him the leader of the engineering group. That makes complete sense to people. However, some of those best people they're best for a reason, because they have more time to do what they do and to work independently sometimes, and they lack leadership skills. And our lives are rich with examples of people that we know of who some have overcome those challenges, and some have evolved to become what they aspire to be, which is subject matter experts. And I remember back in the old days, we had a lot of companies they would try to identify leadership. They'd be like, oh, well, we've got who are our hypos. And I remember being in a meeting vividly, having this conversation, and I'm thinking about who are our hypos. We had hundreds of people in the technology group, and I'm like, I remember we introduced a new term, and that was high pros, because we had a couple like subject
What
matter.
did that mean?
Well, in our world, it kind of meant that we might have some people who are not managing large groups. They may not even have any people underneath them. But they were so critical to our success of our business, and really every company has those. And and the problem sometimes is that in traditional corporations, traditional culture, it's super common that your ability to rise through the ranks is predicated on leading more people. That oftentimes is counterproductive in technology organizations. And
Right.
and
The career path problem with that is a lot of times, in order to make more money, you've got to go into the management. You got to go into the management path.
Yeah,
Right? That's where the higher salaries are, right? And so people are driven by that. At some point, you've been working 10, 15, 20, 25 years in the business, you need to make more money, right?
Yeah, but you kind of hope that you find, and that's what's so important now, is finding the right culture that kind of rewards the right type of, value to the business. And technology is somewhat unique. I mean, salespeople have been like that for years, right? Some of the best salespeople, they don't make them the sales manager. They kind of leave them alone. They give them a big quota and they do their thing. And so I think we kind of understand this method, this issue, kind of within other industries. For some reason,
other industries,
we're slow to learn when it comes to technology. And working closely with your HR organization, it's so important that folks get this issue, that these people are extremely valuable and rare when you can find those ones that can do some of the things that they do, and making them a manager may or may not be the easiest path to success.
If I look at a bifurcated path, a technologist's path versus a leadership path, how have you seen this evolve? And I'm going to sort of stick with the issue of salary right now, of compensation, right? How has this, because you and I used to lament about this a lot, which is like, there's just not a great career path for the technologist. I'm going to be a senior developer 1, I'm going to be a senior developer 2, I'm going to be a senior developer 3, and then like I'm topped out, right? And so how have you seen that evolve? Is it getting better out there with the work that you've done and the work that you've seen your colleagues do around creating a better technologist career path that they can continue to aspire for 20 years down the road?
I'd say it's a little bit better. It's a little bit better because the breadth of the field has grown, right? Like you think about it, 2 years ago, we didn't have AI. Right now that's out there, right? I mean, I said before, 20 years ago, we didn't really have what we would consider, full-scale CISOs, and now those are kind of out there. And then just with the breadth of emerging technologies that are out there, the cloud and everything else, mobility and other sort of characteristics of our all of our lines of business these days, it's like it's given people opportunity just by, I think, pure growth, by growth of the tech stack and the breadth of touch points to an organization. If you think of it a little bit more rudimentary, I don't know if it's all that different. I think it's hard to stay in a small, medium-sized business if you're a hungry, want to learn, tech. You got good tech chops, or you aspire for additional leadership skills. I mean, it almost, in some cases, forces you to kind of go to bigger companies, or, companies that, depending upon the nature of what it is you want to do, you want to get your hands dirty, or you want to be a leader type of thing. But status quo is oftentimes not an option, at least if you're, depending upon the nature of how you like to operate and what your personal and professional growth objectives are.
Do you think these tech environments and these tech stacks that we're talking about, because you were talking about what wasn't around 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. I remember the InfoSec stack that we have at the Red Sox. That showed up around at the very beginnings of it, around 2016, 2017, 2018, 19, stuff like that. I think that's when we first brought Okta in, if you remember right. And then
Sure.
And then like the stack from there to now is like exponentially larger, right? Are we getting wider, or are we getting deeper, or is it both?
It's both. It's both. I mean, you think about it there are areas that, we now think about such a broad array because the threat vectors keep going. As I mentioned before, as your digital footprint continues to broaden, if you have more touch points, in our case to fans or customers or other sort of things, and you have facilities and there's IoT, and every one of those is sort of is a digital opportunity, for bad threat actors. And so as a result of it, you've got to have, evolving tech stack, and, AI kind of ups the ante. And it also gives us better tools, but we're always going to be a little bit behind the people that come up with creative ways to do, bad things. So, but it's going to have to continue to kind of evolve, and hopefully in time it will, I think the biggest challenge you find nowadays with even like leading edge tech tools kind of in the InfoSec space is you lack such a single pane of glass model. You literally have just a portfolio of tools, and, any company out there, I know we're a bit off the beaten path here, but any company out there that does not have a VSOC of some form, where someone is thoughtfully looking at this stuff 24/7, whether it's internal or external, right. I don't know how those companies effectively stay in business in the future, because it has become so complex just to kind of keep your head above water and understanding sort of the risk profiles that are evolving.
Yeah, the single pane of glass is a big deal because, just if you think about even from an operational level, which, that's my background, is, we've got so many avenues of demand coming in, right? We've got ITSM systems and project management systems and workload management systems and workflow systems, and and we've got all the messaging tools, and of course there's email, and then of course there's the walk-ups, right? Literally the vectors of demand are coming in for even your average IT organization, let's say medium-sized company, right? Is literally coming in from 12 different directions, right? And how, as an organization, or how as leadership, right, from a IT leadership standpoint, how are we keeping an eye on all that? How do we understand the demand that's being asked of us, the demand that we're taking on, and the capacity that we have to meet that demand?
Yeah, great questions. I think for those that are listening or watching, I think one of the challenges we all face is that it's very difficult. Most CIOs, and I would include myself in this, I think we struggle with KPIs oftentimes. We struggle, they tend to be a little bit better on the operational side than they are in other areas of the business. But like most CIOs do a poor job of telling their own story. There's a reason why we chose technology and not marketing, and or PR, right? And and I know even in our own company, like we're trying to get better at that, because that is sort of a little bit of a gap, because as much as I think most people who kind of operate in technology spaces tend to have a little bit more of a humble background. You are doing yourself a bit of disservice, and your team a bit of a disservice by not educating. And there's as much as we talk about other aspects of successful leaders, education's a really, really big one, and especially with the speed of change. That if you haven't identified education as a key attribute of your success, then you're really kind of missing something, you know?
Right. Which I've talked a lot about has been a challenge since the recession, right? So when we went through 2008, 2010 through 2010, there was a lot of cutting, right? So I think a lot of the education budgets got cut in a lot of companies, and we've talked about the fact that they haven't really come back. What are you seeing in that area since you are identified in as being really critical?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, you go back many years, like almost every large organization had their own training organization, right? They would train up the average employees. They would, they'd have an IT one if you were large enough that would just focus on technology and things like that. And I remember I worked at Wang Labs years ago, and they had buildings that were dedicated to these things that we would. And I was super impressed, and Wang kind of operated a little bit like a modern day Google in some ways. And you fast forward to some of the times you're discussing, and education has really, in professional development, has been really stripped out of your average budget to a large extent.
Right. And it's time too, right? It's not just the money, like it's the time. So a lot of times we'll budget it, we'll even put it in people's goals for the year, and they don't seem to have the time to take it.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I mean, getting so many people are oversubscribed, and it's great to talk about work-life balance. It's great to have people have and maybe hybrid work environments and things like that. But we really have to make sure people have the capacity, the mental and the physical capacity to actually allocate time to learn. Because learning is another theme that we mentioned that we're going to be talking a lot about. Because what is your methodology for keeping pace with this rapidly changing world? Like, how do you do that? And we'll talk. This will be one of the things we'll talk to a lot of our guests, and because it's really, in my mind, what differentiates successful leaders, CIOs, CTOs, business leaders, and everything else from others is that some people, it's all kind of like on the job learning. Like if you chose to field a technology thinking it wasn't going to change, well, you made a big mistake. And so, and so certs, have come along, as in the last X number of years. And, that's cool. Yeah. I think that's a great addition. I mean, obviously there's so much online training that's nearly freely available, which is amazing. But again, a lot of it comes down to making sure that you're allocating the time and you're putting enough emphasis. In importance. Like, is your culture a learning culture?
Right. You're right. It does come down to culture, doesn't it?
Yeah, because, at the end of the day, how many times have you and I heard, listen, do you want me to learn a new thing or do you want me to get my work done? And every single person,
or I hear, do you want me to tell you about the work I'm doing and spend 2 hours reporting it, or do you want me to just get it done?
Yeah, exactly. And everyone in our shoes is always like both. So
of course.
I think the key thing that and every company is at a different place, and some of them are struggling with legacy issues, and they're still trying to figure out how they're going to decommission all this debt that they've accumulated over the years and things. Right. Yeah. And so so sometimes it's really important to understand where you and where your company are kind of in this journey, because you need to be very realistic. It's not realistic to say, hey, we're gonna leverage all these emerging technologies and we're gonna be leaders and things. And it's so important for all of us to kind of know, like, we don't have to be a leader in everything, right? Very few companies, right? Very few companies really truly need to be a leader in almost all areas. Like, I'll pick something. Your help desk. You might be like, hey, you know what? Our service level is blank, and if we're hitting our service level like on a 10 scale and we're a solid 8, then terrific. Lock and load, try to improve, optimize, but we're not going to reallocate, tens of millions of dollars to get to a 9 or a 10.
Right. It doesn't make sense.
No, and it's the same thing. Like, if you think of your maturity curve, or I guess maturity curve this way, if you think of maturity curve a little bit, like, it's totally fine to be a fast follower sometimes. Right.
Yeah,
or it's you don't
sometimes
need
smarter.
to. Yeah. You don't need to kind of, I think the old days of, every company having a large pool of R&D dollars is gone. Nowadays, if you have funding, it tends to be, small R, big D that like, yeah, you can test some things, but make sure there's a high chance of return. It's not
Right,
just
right.
let's just
Right.
not going to explore some things that, in 8 out of 10 of them don't work.
Yep, for sure. Bringing us back kind of to our topic of
Yeah.
the evolving role of the CIO, just take us for a minute or two on either the path of the typical CIO today. Like I want to get into the mind of Brian Shield, right? The mind and the maybe the day or a week in the life of what does it look like? What's the pathway of a CIO nowadays?
In terms of how you get there or what a day in the life
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
I
kind of
mean,
kind of how you evolve to get there and what it's like when you're there.
well, as we were saying earlier, like I don't believe there's no single path, right? So
Right.
these are like diverging paths. These are like roots of a tree, and a lot of it depends on your industry. A lot of it depends on are they looking for someone to be kind of more technical and helping to evolve the emerging tech element of the business, or are they
Mm-hmm.
looking for someone to be able to communicate effectively to senior leadership and board members? So I think a lot of it. I mean, there's a role for everyone. Like at the senior leadership levels, I think with CIOs and other technology leaders, it's really finding the right culture. It's finding the path that really maximizes your personal attributes,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
resonates. Like I know for me, for many years, I chased technology. I mean, I love technology. It's funny when I met my wife. I remember she was going to college in Boston, and I picked her up late one night after school, and she said, "Where were you?" And I said, "Oh, I was at work." And she's like, "Oh, you're like a workaholic." And I'm like, and I said, "No, no, it's like my hobby." And like but I still think of it that way, which
All right.
is like it's hard to separate sometimes
Yeah,
the
it is.
when you're at work and when you're kind of doing the kinds of things that you love, and
Yeah.
I think that's the a little bit of the holy grail, that we all desire to find, right? That doesn't mean we want anyone working 80, 100, 120 hours a week.
Right.
That's
Right.
not the
Right. Right.
intent.
Right.
But
Right.
you're so much more successful when your personal hobbies and things that interest and excite you is aligned with your job. The hard thing is kind
Yeah.
of finding that path, if you will. You know.
It reminds me of a story I heard. I don't know if you call it a story or just kind of an adage, but if you take sort of like, let's say, someone in finance, whether they're a finance employee or whether they're finance leadership, they work all day, they do their job, but they probably aren't going home at night and jumping into a spreadsheet, right? That's probably not what they aspire to do. When they go home at night. But real technologists, will work all day with computers and then we'll go home and play with our computers, right? So
Well, I told someone today, true story. I was talking to someone today, and I said, the 8 or 10 most complicated problems I've ever had to try to solve in my career, almost every single one of them, the answer occurred to me when I was sleeping.
which is
And
why you don't sleep
so,
much, right?
I'm better now, but like I would keep a pad of paper next to my desk. I still do, and things would just kind of come to you, and you'd be like, "Oh my goodness, I should have
And then you got to
reallocated
get it out
this
of your
array
head.
differently,
And then
or
you
do
got to get
something
it out of your
differently."
head. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but the point sort of is that I think for many of us that's our path to success, which is kind of aligning those things. But I think going to your original question, about the role. I mean, every sales role. That's just the other thing that's different, I think, from other C-suites, which is the day in the life is going to be very different depending upon the nature of your company, the industry that you're in,
Right. That's
like
true.
the successfulness of your company.
Yeah.
Are you on the brink? In which case you're trying to like drive revenue or reduce expenses, drive productivity. I mean, not that we don't want to do those all the time, anyways, but
Right.
those things might become almost like your only job if you're trying to stave off, epic failure of the company or something.
Right. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, but let's assume for a moment the conversation's about a company that's, I don't know if it's flourishing, but it's doing well. I mean, to me, I think I kind of view these things almost like a portfolio manager would look at their portfolio.
Okay.
It's in my mind, you think of these as almost little slices of a pie. One big slice of the pie in my mind always comes into, maybe it'd be the center of the pie, is attract, develop, and retain. People,
It comes back to people. It comes back to
hundred
people.
percent. Like, and
Yeah.
because once you've got good people, you're surrounded by good people, and everything else is possible, right? And then you can start talking about how do you complement it, and whether that I think of these things, by the way, when I've got, how he knows I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and it's in my mind, depending on the size of the company, it's almost like concentric rings, and if you think of the center of the concentric rings are your sort of go-to people. Then as you kind of go out different levels, you've got different specialities in certain cases. Like we talked about CISOs, where you might have some specialty in AI or other areas, type of thing. And then you supplement oftentimes with contract resources where they kind of fit a need, if you will. And but it can become a very, very complicated mosaic, to kind of make this model work. And it needs to evolve. And that's the other challenge, which is, how do you not make it work just for today, but how do you, and I think what the key thing is when I think about these pie slices, one of them, a big important pie slice is how do I help future-proof our company? Like what are the things that our company is likely to look like, 3 to 5 years out? What's the competitive landscape looking like? And what does that mean that our company needs to be better at in order for us to get to that level? So I think successful CIOs and others are really the ones that can kind of balance the today with the tomorrow. It's like both, we talked about people, but also as it pertains to projects, like, where do we make the kind of investments? I mean, we've made some significant investments in recent years that I think of it like a mall. You get these anchor tenants, you can't, you need to have sort of these key solutions, your ERP solutions, your supply solutions, your other solutions, vendor management, other key things. You want to lock those all in and then innovate around the edges, because you can't, no one has enough time to be swapping out ERP systems for a living. I feel bad for companies that acquire companies for a living, because my goodness, those are thankless days in my life
that's what
sometimes,
they do, yeah.
But but so another big chunk of it is how do I future-proof my company, right? How do we get the most out of the people that we have? How do we recruit even in that inner circle? It's almost like, we're in baseball where I work, and and I think I think there's a lot of real parallels to successful career development within a, say, a technology organization, and how a baseball team operates. You sort of have you've got like your marquee players, your all-stars. Hopefully you have a Hall of Famer, in that group. You've got your day-to-day players.
Yeah, your journeyman.
Your journeyman, kind of thing. You've got some rookies that are kind of coming up, right? And some show real talent. And, and you've got a whole, like, minor league franchise kind of model, if you will, like in baseball. We don't have the benefit of that. So in my mind, one of the things they're always thinking about is how are you constantly going to be recruiting? Like, even if it's just a little bit like in your head, what if someone were to leave? Do you have sort of a succession plan? Do you have, other sort of, backstops? If you've got employees that you don't have a lot of depth because you're a small, medium-sized business, then do you have consulting partners that have some level of intimacy with your business? So you're never just, one person away from a epic failure. So anyways.
Or success. Yeah, or success.
Exactly.
It gets back to the people make you and break you. It's so key.
Yeah, and even like in sports, you've got specialists. Like I used the expression before, like high pros. But like, like you've got base stealers, right? You've got defensive experts. You've got the guy that comes in, the closer, that comes in at the end of the game, right? These people have very, very narrow, well-defined tasks. And if you think about a successful IT organization, much the same, and so, one of the things I'll be doing soon is writing an article, trying to like pull out some of these parallels and really some lessons that we can all learn from professional sports. Like you think about the professional player development, in a professional sports franchise, you've got specialists in everything from like sleep to nutrition to psychological and behavioral and strength and conditioning,
motor
and
skills,
eyesight,
motor skills.
Like it's, I mean, it is really impressive.
It really is.
The amount of care and feeding, professional athletes receive. And going back to your comment about what's changed over the years, you think about, us, maybe curtailing budgets in certain cases with professional development, this is sort of the lifeblood of a successful team. So if you don't have the budget, you have to figure out other ways to supplement, in order to ensure that people are, growing in their respective careers.
Right. And there's never enough budget to meet the demands, so you've got to really, really index in on this. It's like tremendous insight. What would you tell? I'm going to wrap up this part of it with one kind of quick question. What would you tell a young technologist in the organization who aspires to get into IT leadership, right? Into upper IT leadership, maybe aspires to be a CIO, CTO, maybe CISO, or somewhere in that suite. What's the one piece of advice? If I only gave you one piece, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
One piece. If I had one piece of advice, it doesn't just, by the way, apply to, say, a role of a CIO, but because I've used the same thing. I've got 3 grown children who are, in the workforce and doing well and everything, and I tell them the same thing. But I will just apply this right now for up and coming technology resources that desire maybe to have more of a leadership role. Find a mentor. It's like, I can't get over the number of people who don't have mentors, and it's shocking to me. And I'll tell you a true story. So part of Inspire CIO, which I'm a big believer in, is they've got a mentorship program as part of their training curriculum.
Membership,
and one of the things that I remember being at an event, it was at Vertex in Boston. I remember being at an event and they were talking to an audience, it happened to be all women actually, this particular leadership group, and they were asking about mentorship. And we had a panel of 6 or 7 CIOs, and I made the comment. I said to every CIO, everyone listening, I think would be nodding at this, right? Like, if somebody approaches you and asks you to be their mentor, like, how many times have you ever said no?
And 0.
Across the board, it's like 0.
It's 0.
Yeah, I mean, people may have times when they're like busy and so they're not going to be able to spend as much time with you and things like that. But it's such a flattering gesture to be asked to help somebody else in their respective careers that, to me, very few people, and it's
100%.
And honestly,
it's one of our human needs, right? Right. Contribution, giving back is one of our. It's an internal need to humans to do, and to have the privilege to be able to do that is compelling.
Totally. And if you think about it, like you and I, we've stepped on every hand grenade you can step on in corporate culture, right? At one time or another.
Oh gosh, yes.
And to be able to give people advice about, best practices and do's and don'ts and all these other things that they're not written in some manual somewhere, that people need to kind of understand to kind of navigate corporate culture and sometimes politics and, and how to get to the next position and opportunities and things. And it's like,
so forks in the road. Yeah.
Totally. So, best advice right now, get a mentor.
I love it.
I will almost guarantee you they'll say yes. And, and by the way, as you evolve in your career, like me, I have 3 mentors, and for different purposes,
right. Because there's no one ring that rules it all.
No, it goes back to something you said before about CIOs and CISOs and CTOs and others. It's CDOs and things. It's like we're people and we're on a journey, right? And like in our case, we're on the back 9, and so the kinds of skills that you're looking for are different. Like the kind of guidance, I should say, skills. The kind of guidance you're looking for, if you're a 25-year-old aspiring technology leader is different than someone who's in their 50s, and
exactly.
And it's really important to recognize that and recognize the culture and recognize where you have gaps. Like you might, like I know when I came to the Weather Channel, I hadn't worked in media before, and I kind of in that time used Gartner, so I had a Gartner partner who kind of was super beneficial, certainly for the first couple of years, to kind of help me navigate sort of the landscape of media. But don't be afraid to do that. I mean, no one's expecting you to have a PhD in every industry there is. They're
Right,
bringing
right.
you in
Nobody
because,
does. Yeah.
hopefully you've got the right skills. And,
Yeah.
the other thing that's changed that you reminded me of how you said that is other piece of advice to up inspiring folks
No, no,
is,
you only had one. You only had one. You're not
oh,
allowed to have two.
all right.
No,
All right. I'll save it
no, go
then.
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Is more and more when we hire people, and this isn't just about our company, but all companies, I think, we're looking for good athletes, and I don't mean sports athletes. I mean,
Right.
I mean business and technology athletes. So.
Right.
Part of the thing is the same thing when I mentioned before about why CIOs were unsuccessful many times early probably in the 2000s especially, is because they didn't adapt. They were one-dimensional. And nowadays, the best leaders and the best technology people are multidimensional. Like we're doing some interviewing right now, and I'm interviewing a candidate the other day, and it's so rewarding, like interviewing a network engineering candidate, and they have a Kubernetes experience, and they've done some Airflow and Python development, and you're just like, and to someone like me, you're just like, finally, it's so great to find these people who have the breadth of knowledge because, especially in a company like ours and other, I'll say medium-sized businesses,
Yeah.
large companies, maybe you want some, very, very lean, domain knowledge in a certain space,
Niche
but
knowledge,
most companies, we aspire to find people who can sort of evolve, grow, and and those things they score much higher in our list of what we're looking for. We go out of our way to find those kinds of people as opposed to those people that just kind of like check the box on kind of the basic fundamentals of the job description.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. You mentioned moments ago, the grenades that we've stepped on, which is a great segue to confession time.
Oh yeah, first confession time.
So this is the first confession on the CIO project on our inaugural run. I'm gonna put you on the spot and ask for your.
You're starting with me. Okay, so this is completely unrehearsed. Well,
these are CIO confessions, so I actually can't give one. So.
Oh, gotcha. Nice.
And plus,
all right.
my mistakes are so numerous. We'd be here all night.
Yeah. Well, for those that are listening, we, we'll talk a little bit more about some up and coming, members who will be joining us, for some of our future podcasts. And this will be something that we'll be sharing with everyone. So we'll give them a little heads up that these are kinds of questions that we'll be asking. But for me, my most maybe humbling moment occurred when I was at the Weather Channel.
Okay.
How
long ago? How far back?
2004.
Okay.
All right. So 2004, 20 years ago, let's call it.
And I'm just going to interject. The Weather Channel for this might surprise a lot of people. I mean, it surprised me when I first went there and got engaged in the environment. It is a fast-moving, 365-day, 24/7, complex, dominoes fall tech stack. There is a lot going on, and it's a pretty large IT organization. And so, I'll just preface what you're about to say with that. There's you. One of the things that we did was years ago, is we combined the broadcast engineers with the IT folks. So we could run a more cohesive process across the board. But you're talking about a lot of moving parts over there. So
and one of the I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but one of the least well-known components of that is the television network. And the success of our television network, the Weather Channel television network, is predicated on what it used to be called, well, maybe it still is called local on the 8s, but that's just a part of it. Local television. So, I mentioned before that we had these servers, proprietary servers that we designed and developed, that had very unique technology on them that would intercept that satellite feed carrying a national broadcast and supplement and add and create crawls and other really dynamic things, both with, in our case, weather content as well as with advertising. So we would do things, we used to call them copy splits, where I could send a different ad copy to different parts of the country based on the weather or based upon geography and other sort of things. Very incredibly novel, by the way. Still novel.
At that time,
but very novel back in early 2000s. But anyways, what made this even more challenging is, if people remember it those days that are old enough, it was also occurring in the early 2000s, but this transition from standard definition or SDTV to HD, high definition television.
Yeah, high def, yeah.
And because our model was predicated on a server, proprietary server that we had to design and build that we paid for, it was imperative that these servers be a sort of low cost but highly functioning and with high operational uptime, because these same devices that we're building against need to service 100 million viewers. So just 100 million television viewers, nothing complicated.
And parts of this architecture was distributed around the country, right? Like, what is it, 5,500 head ends?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number of head ends. You could be right, though. It could be 5,500. Yeah. But these are the, Comcast, Cox, Time Warner, kinds of things, Cablevision, etc. And so anyways, long story short here, we were migrating from SD to HD. The problem is HD was brand spanking new. And we're really trying to do HD on a server, not just HD TV like in a big giant television network where you're spending hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars on high-end processing equipment, but like, how do you take that same functionality and put it on a single server, single blade device? And so, we embarked on a very broad effort to kind of find some of the best-in-class companies in this industry. We talked to all the big ones. We actually spent a lot of time with companies like Apple and IBM and others trying to figure out how we could do that. We settled on a company in Chicago that we felt an engineering organization could help us build this 32-bit PCI card. And we'll get into the weeds, but very complex board running on a FreeBSD operating system that would allow us to be able to tie in a lot of different APIs and other capabilities. Anyways, we got everything. We kicked everything off. We were pretty excited about it. We started, working with them in earnest. They were doing a lot of work both here in the States as well as abroad. And long story short, we got lots of symptoms here early on of risk. Couple key players left. They were quickly replaced by other senior level people. So we kind of, or I'm going to say me, I sort of, at the time, basically we kind of, convinced ourselves that it wasn't as bad as it appeared to be. And we spent the better part of 6 months on this journey with them before we had to pull the plug. And it was hugely challenging. We were probably, between $1 and $2 million loss, financial loss. Right. And so I remember addressing the board of directors. I remember I was up in Canada at one of our, I can't remember, it was a sister company, one of our vendors. I remember I'm on the call with our board and they're like, hey, what do you think? And I said, and this, by the way, thank God this is in the era pre-Zoom. Because this is a difficult call, but it was a little bit easier being able to just kind of talk into a speakerphone. But I'm like, yeah, it's not going to work. We're going to have to pull the plug and start over. And and I remember there was 3 or 4 seconds worth of pause, and then our CEO Decker Anstrom, who, by the way, in my mind is, I think of him as a mentor, just the absolute best leader I've ever worked for in my career in terms of just being a thoughtful, caring leader. And he's like, okay, so what do we do next? And I don't know that I had an answer right away, but we pivoted. Here's the thing, first your heart's in your chest about, having this conversation. And we had obviously thought about it as we got into it, but we made a really unusual decision to actually internalize hardware engineering. And you think about that, most companies would never do something like that. And so we basically built a hardware group, designed and built our own 32-bit PCI cards, and integrated
it's
with
like Wozniak incarnated. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, open source solutions and APIs from some of the NVIDIAs and the Matroxes and some of the large video manufacturers at the time, video card providers, and lo and behold, we made it work, and we got it out before HD became highly, pervasive. Back in the day when these boxes were really expensive. But simultaneously, by the way, we're building a $50 million studio, so we had a lot of things going on at that time. But this particular component of it, we got it out the door. We called it an IntelliStar, and and it was a huge success. And served 100
Didn't you
million
now?
people.
Didn't you win some awards for this?
Yeah, I mean, talking about a 180-degree flip here, right? We
Yeah.
literally went
Right.
from epic failure, and
I'm
we'll
gonna
talk
lose my
about
job. I'm going to lose my job.
to
Yeah.
we won a technology Emmy award, for the work that we did in
We
designing
have an image
this
of that, don't we?
card. I think we do.
Let me see if we can put let's see if Ben can put that up for us real quick. It'll be the Emmy. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, so this award, which was presented to the Weather Channel that I accepted on behalf of our company back in between, I think it's 2004 and 5 or 5 and 6, I forget now.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a big deal. Not just, and it was about localization of technology, but
Right.
for all of us, it was about overcoming adversity and problem solving and coming up with something that was, that met the need of the business, drove revenue. I mean, 25 or more % of the revenue was driven through our abilities to create localization. So anyways, I'm getting a little bit
That's
winded.
super cool.
My only
That's
point
super
there
cool.
is but
Well, the question is, what do you think your biggest learning lesson was in this?
yeah, so funny. We had a project manager at the time, Bernie Parati, if he's listening.
Oh, Bernie, I remember. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
Bernie.
yeah. And Bernie, when I eventually left the Weather Channel, or maybe he gave it to me when I was still there, I kind of forget now, actually gave me
We actually have a picture.
the
of
card. Yeah, I think you have a picture of that. He
Throw that one
actually
up, too.
gave me one of our original
Wow.
32-bit PCI cards. And can you read the inscription on it, Howie? Can
Yeah,
you
it
see
was a blank idea at the time,
Mm-hmm.
but always know when to say when.
When to say when. That's what
Yeah.
and for me, that blank, by the way, is the name of the company. So we're going to leave them
Oh,
out
okay.
of this conversation. The when
Yeah, the
you say
company that you had to
when,
pull the plug on, right?
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I always think of, you think of I'm a big believer of the book. I love the book, like The Knowing Doing Gap. I think it's by Sutton and Pfizer, if I remember correctly, back in like early 2000s maybe. And it's like, even like the VCs to nowadays at Silicon Valley, they preach like fail fast. But do you know what? That
Yes.
fail fast thing wasn't as sticky back in the early 2000s. We were still learning that, by the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Things were a lot more waterfalled at that point.
Totally. And, and even in our organization, the Weather Channel, we wound up being sold to Bain, Blackstone, and NBC. And, having a chance to work with the Bain and the Blackstone folks, we learned a ton. I never thought we could move so as fast as we learned to move. But also in learning, but you make mistakes, but you make quick mistakes. And you pivot. You don't hopefully take 6 months to, wish something through only to discover that it's a failure, and you're kind of putting your company between a rock and a hard place. So I carry that with me, not in a bad way, in a good way. And I don't even mean because of the Emmy and all that. I mean like that it teaches you to when as Bernie was kind enough to say, like when to say when. You really need to kind of be very mindful, and we all manage projects a little bit differently, but these milestones that we set in our projects, you really need to put stakes in the ground on a regular cadence, identify risk, and and always be cognizant of the risk. And when those things start to blink, means that you need to kind of react. And I mean, that all sounds so obvious, I think, to people listening.
No,
like,
but it's
"Oh, of
hard
course,"
because when you've given so much time and effort and capital and everything, we tend to get invested in these things, and it's hard to step back and pull the plug and say, hey, I think I gotta pull the plug. That's a really difficult thing to do.
Yeah, what's the other thing, learning lesson there though, was to, especially on something really complicated like this, like building a board or something complex, it's you really need to make sure you've got a good financial partner, like in your own company, so that while you're working on the engineering side, in this my particular case, someone's keeping tabs on the company's financials. How are they doing? Are they having issues making payroll? Are they why are they downsizing if they're downsizing, and other things? Because oftentimes in our roles, we're not either cognizant or don't have staff with the ability to do both.
Right.
And, and it's so huge, and there's a whole, one of the things that we will talk more about, Javi and I were talking about today, is vendor management. It doesn't sound very sexy, and it probably isn't very sexy, but it is, one of the most important attributes that differentiate, some company, I'll say relatively effective companies from like best in class businesses.
Right, right. No, it's so hand in hand with your people first philosophy. So hand in hand.
Yeah.
Well, right
totally.
on, man. Well, that was beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for being brave. We've all
Yeah,
we've all
thank
been
you.
there.
I'm glad I had. I'll let my psychiatrist know that these have now been all my demons have been raised again. I can get back on the couch or something. But
yeah, that's awesome. Well, right on. Well, let's see. As we wrap up, I gotta
yeah,
thank our sponsors, which actually is just one sponsor. Today's show is brought to you by Sherpa Techs, where we unlock your IT resource visibility. Go to 60mins, as in minutes, .sherpatex.com to learn more. That's 60 M as in Mike, I as in India, N as in November, S as in Sierra, .sherpa, like the mountain climbers, tex.com. So anyway, got that out of the way. Hey,
nice.
let's invite everybody to join us next time where we look forward to seeing on our next show. We'll be sitting down with Vala Ashfar, who's a good friend of yours, right? Chief Digital Evangelist at Salesforce, co-author of Boundless, and he is a ZDNet columnist and co-host of Disrupt TV. Your quick thoughts on Vala, Brian?
Oh my gosh! Like you guys are in for such a treat. If you haven't already seen him on Disrupt TV, he and Ray Wang are just remarkable. But Vala, he's a Boston-based guy, great person. I mean, one of the best people I've ever met. And and one of those people whose role is to really be thinking about the future. So when you think about future-proofing, he's the guy who thinks about those things more than anybody. And if you haven't read his other books, they're all great reads. I know he's working on a new one, and we're super excited to have him here talk about the future, talking about what you guys can do, what are best practices from his perspective, and what he's learned in his journeys to kind of make us better leaders.
Yeah, I'm excited to have him on. He's just he's a ball of energy and sharp as a whip. So I look forward to that. Well, all right, everybody. Until next time, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Steve Jobs. It's from his now infamous 2005 Stanford commencement address. And he quotes, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important." Until next time, we're out.
Thanks, everyone.